There you go. All right, Full Stack Web 15. Welcome to Applied JavaScript Sprint. We're going to be talking about DOM 1, Document Object Model 1. So let's kind of look at the lay of the land for this week. We've got DOM 1, DOM 2, and then we jump into some interesting stuff called components. So this is going to be taking everything you've learned from the past 3 weeks, and we're going to be using all of it. So HTML, CSS, preprocessors, JavaScript, we're going to be using all those things. And now, and of course, with our HTML, we're going to be manipulating that stuff now. And this is going to be the best week, I think, as far as seeing why did we do all the things the last 3 weeks the way we did. It's to build up into this week. And then in our 5th week, we have a project week. And in that project week, we got to really do all the things that we've done in preparation for React. So it's pretty crazy. In the first 5 weeks, we cover what was web development for front-end developers for the last 15 years. It's pretty crazy what we cover in 5 weeks. So if it feels intense, it's because it is. It really is. So let's start talking about DOM 1. So we're going to explain what the heck the DOM is, how it relates to an HTML page. We're going to be using DOM selectors to select elements on a page and describe the differences in the behavior of each. And then we're going to be using different properties and methods, that's right, objects, to manipulate a selected element. So pretty cool. A lot of the same terminologies that we've been using for our JavaScript objects are just used right along here. So a property is a property, a method is a method. It's the beauty of using our DOM. So let's talk about what the heck the DOM is. So the DOM itself, I mean, you could read this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to show you this right here. So this diagram right here shows you a visual representation of the document object model. And you're going, okay, wait a second, document object model, what the heck does that mean? Well, the browser, like the browser that I'm in right now is Chrome, but there are many browsers. There are big ones like Firefox, Safari, Edge, Opera. There's some really big browsers out there, large use bases that are using these browsers. Now, why does anybody, why do all these people use different browsers? Well, it's because there's different companies, right? And different hardware. And for a long time, there was a dark ages of computer web development, I should say. And we call them the browser wars. I lived through the tail end of the browser wars. Luckily, I was not at the beginning of it. But basically, it was a time where you had to write multiple web pages for different standards. So imagine you do all this work on one page, like maybe a whole app, and then you have to go rebuild a whole new app with different nuances for just a different browser. It was awful. And so I don't know if you remember, some of you might be old enough to remember, when you'd go to a web page and the browser would say, this browser is not supported, or this website's not supported by this browser. Like that would be the message on it. It would say, you literally just cannot view this web page. That was awful. And so luckily, in time, a standardization across multiple browsers occurred. And so now, as a new web developer in this time, 2018, we now have an amazing opportunity to use modern browsers that have learned from past mistakes and have standardized quite a bit. Now, I say quite a bit because I can't say 100%. There are still cross-browser issues to this day, especially in the document object model realm. But the good news is they're so edge, and not by the browser, but they're so edge case that we don't have to worry about them as we learn fundamentals. Okay, so what is this tree-like structure here? Well, it's the standard in which all the browsers, modern browsers, adhere to in rendering an HTML page. Interesting. So in this case, our document is actually just a big object. And we learned through prototypal inheritance and JavaScript, everything's an object. Well, inside of our browser, we're utilizing JavaScript to communicate with this document object model. So notice that this is separate. This is not actually JavaScript proper. It's considered a separate application programming interface. or an API. If we go to the Mozilla Developer Network, we can see up here, if we go look at DOM stuff, if we like try to do anything inside of DOM, it says API all over the place. It's a web API. So what the heck is an API? Well, an API, again, application programming interface, allows us to interface between two different technologies to accomplish the same goal. So in this case, the DOM allows us to interface JavaScripting, like our scripts that we're writing, and our HTML objects that we've been writing. So, interestingly enough, if we go look at our code here, I've got some HTML. Let me give you this link. This will be our code pen for the day. All right, so click on that link and then look at this with me. So we've been writing our code in some semantic HTML and divs and presentational HTML, right? We've learned all these cool things. And the code on the left is actually our HTML. It's what we wrote. But the representation on the right is not actually HTML. It's the DOM. So what we're actually looking at over here is a representation of the document over here. That's kind of a crazy thing to think about. And the cool thing about CodePen is we can see them side by side, so it's really nice. But let me show you what I mean. So there's a bridge here between the two. On the left, we have HTML. On the right, we have DOM. Okay? This bridge right here is just a compilation inside the browser that says, okay, look, if you've got a div class container home, I'm going to translate that to be the DOM version of it, okay? So there's a translation that happens between these two. And we might not have noticed it before because we just weren't ready. We just need to know, we need to know what HTML is before we can actually figure out what the heck this DOM structure is. So to have a tree-like structure like the DOM, we have to have some kind of root, some base that we can go off of. Well, we do have that, and it's, well, we got to view page source to see that. So if we come in here and let's see, why is it not letting me view page source? Weird. See if I can do, well, we can see it right here. It's fine. So you can see up here at the very tip top of our page, we have our HTML5 doc type declaration. So in this case, we're starting to build our document right here at our HTML tag. So let's go ahead, everybody jump in the console with me. Let's get some fingers on keyboards, if you will. Come on into your console and let's type something here. So I'm gonna say console.log, like we always do. And I'm just gonna type in document, hit enter. Now notice that it gives us, and let's see what, let me get this browser down here. Notice that when I highlight this element right here, look at that. See how everything goes blue? It's showcasing that I'm actually talking to something that's alive and working. So I'm going to open this up. I want you to open up yours as well. And I want you to see what's inside of this. Well, look at that. It's just the HTML structure that I was referring to before. That's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and open that up. Okay, there's a head, which has all of our metadata and like stuff that we can't see. But if we look at our body tag, we can now see, oh, there it is, exactly, the body tag. That's cool. So then if we open that up, make this a little bit bigger, we can start traversing the DOM or going through this big tree-like structure. So now we can see where it says container home. So we've got our HTML, our head, which we can't see, our body, which we can see, and then we have our div class container home. And you can see it highlights over here. Well, if I open this up, you can see that this container home has children inside of it, right? Nested children. So let's go back to, or I'll just go back here. You can stay in your console for a second. But you can see exactly how this representation works. The document object, which we just console logged together, that is the base root of how the DOM, the document object model, understands our HTML. So that is the interesting thing that happens, whether you knew it or not. Now you know that when you're using a browser, it renders your HTML into DOM objects that can be understood by the browser. And then we can manipulate them as developers. We can change them. What's crazy about the DOM is it's live, meaning not static. It's actually live. So I can go to anything, right? I can go to the old tried and true ESPN.com. I can come in here and after the ads load and everything, inspect element, scroll down here a little bit, and I can go into their title and I can actually manipulate live content. So here it says, Barnwell flaws for contenders. Who's dragging down each team? So I can come in here and say, sports. Come back and you can see I'm updating the actual DOM. Now, because I'm updating the DOM, as long as I'm on this page, that sports will maintain. Like if I scroll down, scroll back up, there it is. And so it's interesting because in this case, we are using the DOM and not actually touching the source code or the HTML that we wrote. So I want you to understand very early on the distinction between our static HTML that we've been writing, and now we have a live, living, breathing document called the document object model that allows us to manipulate all these elements on the page. Of course, if I refresh the page, watch what happens. We get our title back. So that's a really good example of what the live DOM looks like. Okay, so coming back to our code and back into the console that I had you log out, you can see these tree-like structures. So tree meaning here's our root, and then we have some branching, and then these branches have other children inside of them. Now, attributes are interesting, like class, right, and A, B, C, D, and all this stuff that I have in here. These are considered to be leaves, or, I mean, in our analogy of a tree, they're considered leaves. But they are actually attributes on our node, our elements, sorry. Okay, so what are these little things called? What are these shapes that we're calling? Well, we call them nodes. So everything inside of our DOM is considered a node. So this is a node, that's a node, this is a node, that's a node. Like everything's a node. That's just the word we use to describe the representation of these objects. There are different node types though. And those types are really interesting. Like for example, you can see here how it says root element, 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 text. You see those nodes? Those are the node types. These node types have a specific number assigned to them. So if I were to go to like MDN, do node types, wonder if they've got it in here. There it is. Maybe. Click, yes, okay. So you can see that these node types have a value associated with them. And they can tell you what, like where they came from. Now you might be going, why the heck do we need these node types? Like it's not a very JavaScript thing to do to type things, especially since JavaScript is loosely typed. Well, that is because the DOM can actually be interpreted by other languages besides JavaScript. So we can actually use, like, for example, Java, which is not JavaScript at all. They just sound similar because of marketing. It's too long of a story. You can Google that. It's kind of a fun one. But for example, you could use another language to manipulate the document object model, including like XML, and that's not HTML. This kind of irks a lot of hardcore like JavaScript developers, because we wish we could just have an API that's specifically for JavaScript and not trying to like cater to other languages. But unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. And so there are some cumbersome things that we have to worry about when it comes to using the DOM. For now, I just want you to understand that there are different types of nodes inside of that tree. So let's go and like test this out. I'm going to go back to my inspected element over here, or my console, I should say. And I'm going to go ahead and just go to the bottom of my console here. And I'm going to type in a command of a node type here for a document. So what I'm doing is now I've got my document object like I did up here, right? Now I'm going to grab the document element, which is the root element. I'm going to say, what kind of node type are you? I'm going to hit enter. Notice that it's a type of 1. Okay. So if we go look at 1, it says it's an element node. An element node such as a p tag. So basically, like almost the vast majority of every web page is element nodes. Like it's very rare that you get anything else. Like a text node is just the text, like the actual text of an element, which is pretty interesting. Because if you think about that, you're going, wait, whoa, okay, that's interesting. So if we go back up here and we say like, what's inside of this DOM, like this DOM-1, well, that could be considered a text element versus the container itself is just an HTML element. So text node and an element node. So the biggest thing I need you to understand and be able to explain is that the DOM is a tree-like structure. It is made up of nodes that are nested inside of each other. And we can access these nodes in different ways. All right, before we move on to accessing these nodes, are there any questions that I can help or any confusions I can make clear on what I talked about with the DOM? Andrew says this information is good to node. Well played, sir. Okay, let's see. I don't see any red question marks, just a bunch of comments. That's just great. All right. So in this case, we now know we've got document. We can go through here and look at root element. We can see element. There's different types of nodes, but every little piece is called a node. So if I go back into our HTML here, remember, this is written in HTML, hypertext markup language. It's then translated into our DOM. And our DOM is a live node list that has different abilities based on what we're trying to do. Okay, so just get that knocked out right from the beginning. So if we go down further, we can start looking at our DOM selectors and start actually trying to get certain things. So interestingly enough, to try to talk to these DOM nodes, we need to first like figure out where are they? Like where are you in the tree? Because these trees can be huge. Like even this little representation here has 1, 2, 3, 4 nested deep. And if we tried to get these things individually, it'd be a nightmare. So the cool thing is we can actually use our DOM and certain commands to get these elements. So the way we do this is we reference that document that I just had as console log. That document is the representation of the whole web page. So you're going to see this a lot because we're going to start saying, okay, document, and then this document object. So if we go to MDN, we can see, notice that it's in the web API, that in the document, we can then talk to our nodes, which then have event targets, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. But today we're going to be focusing on this relationship, document and node. So look at all these crazy properties and methods that we have. I mean, it's insane how big the document object is. It's really big object. I'm scrolling for days. There we go. So it's kind of fun. Like it's cool to see all this stuff, but it's also super overwhelming as a new developer. You're like, I have to memorize this stuff. And the answer is no, you don't have to memorize everything. There's just a couple really helpful methods and properties that we're going to memorize. One of the first ones that we're going to start learning is how to access these nodes inside of our tree. So first off, let's put it in storage, right? So const, and then let's do the main header. So we'll do main header like that. Oops. We'll do main header like that because we're in JavaScript, not CSS. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold in memory something, and we're going to memorize the position. Check this out. So document is our tree-like structure, right? Our DOM. And so now we've got document, and now I'm going to introduce you to a new method. We're going to start off by using query selector. And this is a method that allows us to query a CSS selector. So all that CSS, all that time that we've invested is now getting some payback inside of our JavaScript. So what we can do is we can actually reference inside of here, and we can say, based on the query selection I want to make, so main header has a class of main-header. Well, I can just say dot, because I have to make sure it's a class. Otherwise, query selector could get an ID, could get an element. And I'm going to say main header like that. So this is all new to you, unless you've done some pre-class reading, which I hope you did. So in this case, main header is holding in value our document tree-like structure. We're then querying inside the tree, and we're trying to find main header. So I went down here and I found main header right there and said, okay, I know what I've got. Let's see if we do actually have what we think we got. So console.log, and I'm just going to log my main header, just like that. Header. Okay, let's open up our console. And you can see I've got my full node element. Okay, so let's make sure we say it the right way, because in this case, we're getting our full node element right there. And now we can start manipulating it because we know what it is. We have control of it. Isn't that cool? So we're like sniping this out. We're just grabbing that one piece. Now, what if we need to be more general? What if we wanted to select anything? So if I said const select anything, and of course, I'm just making a silly variable name. Don't get caught up in those names. So document dot query selector. The query selector is pretty crazy powerful because inside of these quotes, I can literally query any element that's viable on the page. So for example, if I wanted to query select the first, by the way, query selector, let me make a little note here. Query selector, let's make it syntactically correct. Query selector selects the first matching element in your string. So let's read that slowly. Query selector selects the first matching element in your string. So that means if there was multiple classes of main header, it would not get the second one. Okay, it's like a big gotcha. So query selector stops the second it sees the first thing that you're trying to get. So for example, we have 4 A tags right there. Well, if I put in my A tag, what element's going to be returned there? Let me turn this off so I can. That's right, it's going to be home. And so if we try to console log select anything and see what it grabbed, let's see what it came back with. Save and run. And there it is, the home tag. It's the first matching tag. So query selector's got that little quirk, which I think is a good thing. We want to be able to stop somewhere. There's another selection we can make to get everything. But in this case, query selector simply returns the first matching stringed element. That's pretty cool. So notice that I didn't put a dot in here. That's because the A tag is just an element. So it's another powerful feature of query selector. Okay, what if I wanted to get something with the first matching ID? Well, let's see. I've got an ID right here called home tag, which is kind of silly because it's the same A tag, but it'll work. So I'll come in here and we just do home tag, just like the selector matches, just like in CSS how we would write it. So if we clear it, save it, and run it, you can now see I'm correctly getting my ID of home tag. So query selector is super powerful. You can grab classes, you can grab IDs, you can grab anything that has a valid CSS selector, and it will match that selector. It's super cool. So that's nice, but what if we wanted to get all the A tags? Well, it's as simple as adding one more word to our query selector. So I'm going to say select everything, and I'm going to say query selector all. That's it. That's all you got to do to change it. Now in this case, let's look at the A tags and see what happens. So I'm going to say select everything. Everything. Okay. So in this case, if I clear, save, and run, it's saying, warning, log is too large. Got to go to the real console. Okay, cool. Let's go. So we go to the console. Whoa. There we go. Let me clear this console since it has some of our older code in it. There we go. So notice our first thing that we wrote came back. We're just fine with our query selector. We had our next ID selector looking good, and then all of a sudden we've got this interesting thing coming back. It's called a node list. Let's go see what the heck a node list is. Node list. So a node list, notice that it's part of our web APIs, meaning it's part of our DOM. Node list objects are collections of nodes, which we know about, usually returned by properties such as node child nodes and methods such as document query selector all, which we just used that, right? So in this case, although node list is not an array, it is possible to iterate over it with for each. It can also be converted to a real array using array.from. Interesting. We'll come back to this later. However, some older browsers have not implemented node list for each, nor array from. This can be circumvented by using array.prototype for each. See this documents example. So they're just saying, warning, some browsers don't support all this crazy goodness. So, okay, what do we do with a node list? Well, it's really interesting. In some cases, the node list is live, meaning that changes in the DOM automatically update the collection. For example, node.childNodes is live. So it comes in here and basically we can change out the different pieces inside that list. So if we come back here to our node list and we open this up, we can see that it's array-like, but not truly an array. Notice it's proto. Its proto is not pointing to array. It's pointing to node list. And if we open up node list, we can come down here and we say ultimately it's pointing back to object. So remember proto, it's our inheritance chain and shows us where we inherited our properties and values from. Well, in this case, notice that we are limited to entries for each, item, keys, length, and values. These are the only things that we have access to when we use a node list. So it's pretty cool, but it's not quite an array. And so as we learned, we can actually convert this into an array by using array.from. So let's go look at array.from real quick. The array.from method creates a new shallow copied array instance from an array-like or iterable object, which a node list is. It even says in the name, an array-like object. So in this case, we can simply say array.from, and then we can pass in our value and turn it into an array. Why would we want to do that? Why would we want to turn something that's almost like an array into a proper array? That's right, Sean. More methods. That's right, Ben. Very good. You're getting it. So in this case, look at array. Right? We have all of our awesome methods that we just learned so much about last week. And so you might be thinking, and I thought the same thing too, by the way. Well, that's stupid. Why don't they just return an array instead of a node list? And the answer is because the DOM, remember, is not JavaScript native. It can be used by multiple languages. And so to alleviate other languages and their own array methods, they returned what's called a node list or an array-like object, because they know that other languages can take array-like objects and turn them into an array. Isn't that silly? So stupid. So that's one of the problems of the DOM being compatible with all these different languages. If it was just specific to JavaScript, then you better believe that it would just return an array of objects. But because we're using something that could be used on Java or other languages, they give us a node list instead. So what we can do is we can convert. So we can say array.from like this. We can pass in our array or our array-like object, which was select everything, and actually convert it into an array. So let me console log the before and after. So before it's a node list, we convert it to an array, and then we find out what it is. So I'm going to hit save and run. We're going to go look at the console again because these are too big for the browser to handle. And so in this case, let's see, did we run everything correctly? Should have turned it into an array. Nope, 2 node lists. Did I write that incorrectly? Select everything, right out from. I wonder if I have to put that in my log to see the difference. Save and run. Inspect. Console. There we go. So we had our node list right there. We then converted it with a right out from, and now it says it's an array. See the difference? So the proto is pointing back to node list, and the proto is now pointing back to array. And the reason we did this is because the DOM is an API. It's not native to JavaScript. Therefore, we had to take one extra step and convert it into a JavaScript array with all of its methods. We will be using this later in the week, so that's why I'm showing it to you now. But for today, you just need to go, okay, interesting. The DOM is not JavaScript native, and so we have to do sometimes funny conversions like this to get over that behavior. All right, any questions I can answer at this point? Andrew says, are there other selectors that select the first matching element in the string, or is it query selector the only one? Query selector is the only one that I would recommend, but I'm going to show you a couple more in a second, and then we'll take a break. But these are like, query selector and query selector all are like the go-to right now in modern web. Let's see, I don't see any other questions. Oh, David said, so do you have to place the DOM elements into a variable when you want to edit it? Yes, because you want to basically, you want to have total control, right, David? You want to be able to make sure that our main header isn't bleeding into our home tag. Now, could we do this? Could we just take our selector here and console log it? Yeah, we totally could, right? But that's kind of silly because then we'd have to log it every time we want to use it. And so right now I'm only logging it, but I'm about to do some more cool stuff. I'm going to show you some awesome properties and methods. And then you would not want to write that whole line out every single time. So this just helps us keep dry code. That's why we do it. Let's see, Kai says, I think I asked this before, but this is how one scrapes a web page, right? Yeah, this is how you could scrape a web page for sure. You could iterate over all the DOM objects and then put them in and store them in another value. Okay, let's take, let's see. Let's finish the last 2 selectors and then we'll take a break because I forgot we started like 5 minutes late or whatever. So in this case, we've got query selector and query selector all. Let me show you some older ones that are still good to know. So older, but good to know. So we can say const, and we could get tag names. Like we can actually just get tag names alone. So we'll say tag names, or tag elements, I should say, just to be more proper. So you can say document dot, and then we can actually go and say get elements by tag name. It's kind of a long name. So get elements by tag name. I mean, you can already see why query selector takes the cake, right? So we come in here and let's say we get an A tag. So in this case, let's find out what happens when I console log. This is actually a little more interesting than you probably think. So console.log tag elements. Let's see what actually occurred here. So I'm going to hit save and run. Go back to my console. And notice we get something even newer or older, depending on where we're coming from, an HTML collection. So if you look at an HTML collection, look where it's pointing a proto, and you can see the methods on it are very limited. So we've got an item, and that's it, and length, and like named item. So this doesn't even have even a basic loop inside of it. So an HTML collection was before node list, and that's really what's going on here is we're getting a shallow copied list again. So it's not an array, it's an HTML collection. Can we turn HTML collections into arrays? Yes, you totally can. So array.from is your best friend when you start using array-like objects inside of the DOM. So cool to know, but query selector all does the same thing and is more powerful because of node lists. All right, and then we can actually get all of our class names by the same kind of way. So we're going to do class elements, assign the value of document dot get elements by class name, and that's quite the mouthful as well. The only interesting thing here is that because I know I'm using a class name, I no longer have to use the dot. So if I wanted to get all my nav items, for example, come in here and say nav item, and it already knows I'm using a class, so I don't have to put any extra dot or hash or anything. Of course, it's an ID. So let's go see what happens here. Save and run. And console. And looky here. It gives us an HTML collection of all of our matching class names. So that's why I consider these to be older but good to know, because they basically are crappier versions of query selector, query selector all. There's just no bones about it. They're just not as effective. They don't come with built-in methods, and yeah, just not something that I don't actually use these ever, except in older cases where I have to. But now with Babel, you don't even have to do that. So anyway, good stuff to know, because you might see it in code bases, and I don't want you to be blown away when you see it. I don't want you to be like, what the heck is that? Now, one that's still kind of used, but older as well, is specifically an ID. So constant here, and we'll just say, you know, my custom ID. Document dot get element by ID. And so, oops. In this case, if we wanted to get that home tag again, we just pop it in a string. And it knows again that it's an ID, so I don't have to put a hash in front of it. And it's the same thing as basically query selector, except it only gets an ID. So if I clear it, save it, and run it, inspect, and console log, you can see there's the home tag that we got with query selector, and then here's the home tag we got with get element by ID. So now you can hopefully see why you can do everything with these two selectors in modern browsers. These are good to know just in case you don't have the luxury of working with that somehow. But I wouldn't lose sleep over these right now. I would say, okay, what do I need to study? These two. It's hard. It's like so hard, you guys. Like I wish like if I was teaching iOS or something, it's like, here's how you do it forever for all those devices. What a great thing. But in here, it's like, there's 1,700 ways to do the same thing because browsers suck. That's the problem with the DOM. But these two right here are the big winners, query selector and query selector all. I just don't want you to be confused if you ever see these in the future and you were never told about them. Okay, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to start talking about how we can try these things out on our own. So 5-minute break. Step away from the computer, please. Take a break. Okay, welcome back from the break. Hopefully you let this stuff simmer on your brain a little bit and you're like, okay, document object model, representation of HTML. Okay, so let's try to figure out how we can console log some other elements on this page. So what I want to do is I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Take this very page here, and I want you to mess around and try to figure out how you could console log elements that we have not done. Also, if you're feeling really comfortable here, I'd recommend you take a crack at using the built-in methods of NodeList and see what you could do with a loop. Okay, so play around with this. 5 minutes. I want you to, for 5 minutes, console log out different elements that we maybe have not done yet. So don't do these. Log out different elements that we have not done yet for 5 minutes. Okay, ready, go. All right, I'm gonna pop in a thread here. If you feel like you want to show off anything you did, do it. So here we go. DOM selection thread. There you go. Pop in that thread. Show me. And I'll change the screen back to where we can all view it. Okay. Let's see, Andrew. Okay. So inside of here, Andrew went and grabbed the home tag, the A tag. It was up there, older but good to know, still good to use. Okay, so in here, Andrew said, all right, child nodes for the class elements. So in class elements, grab the class elements, and then got undefined. Oh, is this the code that you Andrew posted in code and said, what do I want to know? What did wrong? You got to tell me that stuff before you put it in there, Andrew. Here, we'll go down to Kai real quick. We'll come back to it. All right, in this case, cons articles, query selector, all p tag. Okay, look at this. So we have articles, which is going through all the p tags. For each p tag, run this and console log the element. Okay, let's see what this looks like. So there's our node list, testing. And so if we come down here, we can see we have one p tag. So the for each isn't really going to help us that much with a p tag, right? Or it's the a tag in this case. Okay, there we go. I was looking at the p tag for some reason because of this. Wait, okay, it is the a tag. Throw an a tag in there. Let's run this thing again. I saw the a here and just thought a tag, but it was not the a tag. It was the p tag. So come in here to the console log, and now we get something really cool. So now you can see how Kai was using the for each to iterate over that and provide each individual value, which we could then do something with that value. Awesome. Okay. So going back to Andrew, so you were looking at child nodes. So if we go look at MDN child nodes, it's a read-only property. Returns a live node list of child nodes of given element where the first child node is assigned an index of 0. So in this case, the child node reference and then the child nodes. So in this case, they're saying, okay, if this thing has length, remove all children from a node. So child nodes is just letting us know it's a read-only property returning a live list of child nodes of the given element. So it should be pretty straightforward. Let's go see what we did here. So class elements. Where are you, class elements? There you are. So class elements. Okay, so what you were doing is you were reassigning a node list, which we don't want to use, a node list assigned to a value of a class elements, which is just this, right? So really, we don't even need that. We just need our reference here, our class elements. And then if we try to, get this thing logged, it's going to try to find the child nodes of our class elements. And in this case, it's our nav items. And we're getting elements by class name. And so let's see if this works. So we have undefined because it doesn't know what's going on. It might be because child nodes is using an HTML collection. So I wonder if we change this to query selector all, if that changes anything. I'm interested here. Undefined, nope. So I wonder if it needs the child nodes. Well, let's see if they even have child nodes. So query selector all class elements, nav items. So they have child nodes that are about, blog, and contact. Those are technically text nodes. But it's a read-only property. It should give us those back. Do you guys see anything? Oh, there's a typo there. So nav items, nav item. Nope, still not working. So class elements, document, query selector, all nav item, nav item. Let's first off, let's make sure we got what we think we got. So we'll run it. Okay, cool. We come into our console. We've got our node list. So our node lists are going to be in the 0th position. So remember now we've got, so we probably have to do something like this, where we say it's 0th position, child nodes, run, and there we go. So that's the problem, is because we're using an HTML collection or an array, we have to reference the indice. Does that make sense, Andrew? Why that didn't work? Okay. All right, well, that was a fun little learning exercise on the fly. Thank you, Kai and Andrew, for submitting those. All right, let's keep going down our list. So we've learned how to select elements. That's cool. But let's do something with this. Let's like actually change something. So we'll go past all of our query selector goodness. And we'll start getting into some stuff where we can actually see that awesome live DOM changes occurring. So in this case, we can start using different methods on our document object. Okay, this is really cool. So we can use text content, gets and sets the text of an element. So basically, we can change it to something new. A little typo there, I gotta update that. Let's go try this out. So text content looks just like this. So we come back here. And let's say we've got our main, remember our main header right there. So I'm gonna delete all this craziness. Main header is our reference to hello FSW15. Actually, never mind, it's DOM1. It's our actual H1. My bad. So in this case, it's DOM1. So let's see if we can change the text content. So now that we've got this DOM object, we can start using methods. So let's go see this really quick. I just want to show you, like, I'm not making this stuff up. Notice that it says node text content. So we can't just text content random stuff. We've still got to use our document object model because it's relying on a node here. So the node in our case is what? It's main header, right? It's our reference. So this is representative of that node, and then everything to the right of it is how we write our code. So in this case, all we've really got to do is assign a new string. It's that simple. It's so cool. So element.text content, assign the value of, write the thing you need. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say testing. Now watch this. It's live. So if I hit save and hit run, let's see here. DOM1, main header, it should be changing to testing. Oh, I goofed the capital H. Copy and paste saves the day, everybody. There we go. So testing comes in because we're actually changing the DOM. This is crazy because the source code, the source HTML said DOM-1, right? But in this case, we've now overwritten that in JavaScript. This is like a big moment for you. If it's not, you should wake up to this moment and say, I'm using JavaScript now to manipulate my source code in the DOM. That's pretty awesome. So in this case, well, some people would say it's not awesome because those are the people that are purists and don't want JavaScript on the internet and turn JavaScript off when they're browsing it. And I'm okay with those people because usually it's accessibility. And unfortunately, when we start using bigger apps that require JavaScript, like React, for example, it's just, you just can't use it, and that's sad. So if you want to have a bigger global impact with your web page, static HTML and CSS is the way to go, which is, it's laughable because usually you need a database and all this backend stuff that you can change out, but JavaScript makes things much more interactive. So it's a two-edged sword. Accessibility on one side and, you know, modern browser features on the other. So over here, we're using testing. Cool. So text content allows us. Now you might have heard of inner HTML. but I would highly recommend against using inner HTML, because inner HTML can actually read tags. So we can actually put HTML in here and it would be rendered. Whereas our text content will just render it as a string and will not interpolate it. Okay, so for those of you that have security on your mind, which you should, there's a thing called XSS, cross-browser security issues, that we're not gonna like deep dive into. But cross-browser security basically states that if you have ways for people to access your code on a front-end level, like in this case, the DOM, someone could inject their whole page into your HTML element. For example, what if I took as a selector the HTML like in the page? Or what if I took like the topmost container in this case, right? So I said const, and we'll just say, home selector document dot query selector, and I passed in my home class, right? The very tip top one. Well, if I did this and I said home selector dot inner HTML, all your base are belong to us. Now, if I run this code, my whole web page just got owned, right? So now you could be saying, well, what about the text content? Well, let's go try it out. Save it and run it. So we're still getting jacked up here. And the interesting thing is we have to be super careful about these things. But inner HTML will actually swap out and bring in new HTML, whereas the only harmful thing we could do here is put in like a silly string. So this is like the beginnings of, whoa, wow, there's a lot of power and almost too much power, and now we've got some security problems. So just keep that in the back of your mind, that we want to use text content and not inner HTML because of the interpolation ability. Okay? So that's text content. We can start setting attributes. So we can actually update attributes. This is where I think it gets really fun. So with the DOM manipulation, we can start manipulating all sorts of fun stuff. So what I've done down here is I've got this little custom image of a kitty, but you'll notice the source is not found. Well, what we need to do is select this kitty. So what would be the selector that I could write out? And let's say I specifically wanted to get the kitty class. What selector, how would I write that? Give me an example of how I could write that selector. Jonathan says, document.querySelector, kitty. Yes. Very good, Jonathan. Also, nicely done with the backticks. So if we come in here and we bring in his code exactly, we could say const kitty, assign the value of, right? Now, just to be clear here, I could just chain things on the end of this. I could say text content right here. The reason that we like to have these things separate is because of reuse. Like, what if we wanted to use kitty for something else later on? You just never know if you are or not. So that's why I like to hold these things in variables. But you can chain things on the end of these selections. So in this case, I'm going to say kitty, and then its source attribute is interesting. There's two ways. There's an archaic way, and there's a new way. The new way is super cool. You just type dot, and then the attribute name, SRC. It's that simple. So in this case, we've got our kitty, and we know it's got an SRC. So we can then assign it to be a URL. And I've got a URL in my notes over here, so we don't have to type this thing out and get crazy accidental typos like I always have, because we're all humans. Okay, so now I'm gonna hit save and run. And there's kitty. So in this case, we've updated the source with an updated image. Isn't that cool? So let me just show you again, because we were staring at that all your base for too long. If I run this again, you can see no image found. If I pop in the URL and save and run, it now has the image because I updated the source later in the JavaScript. Okay, well, if we inspect this element, we can see that on the image tag, the alt says no image found. Well, there's an image there now. So we should probably update this as well. So how do you think I could write this? How could I update the alt tag based on what I just showed you with the source tag? That's right. Kitty.alt and say, this is a picture of a kitty. So we save it, we run it, and then we can inspect element. And you can see here, the alt tag is updated in the live DOM. This is a picture of a kitty. Pretty cool. Kai says, wait, why does the no image found not, okay, never mind, I see it was alt text. That's right. So for example, Kai, if we eliminated this source, we should see now in our alt text, this is a picture of a kitty, and we do. By the way, this changes depending on which browser you're in. So Firefox, Chrome, they have different renderings of this. Okay, so Andrew talks about something that was also talked about as an example in the assignment, and that is set attribute. So if you go back to the training kit, we can see that set attribute or passing an actual attribute itself are both valid. But with set attribute, it's a method that takes two arguments. So you basically got to say the attribute to set and the value to set to that attribute. So in this case, if we were to take the exact example from training kit and throw it in here. So element is kitty, right? So there's kitty. Attribute would be src. And then our URL, let me go grab it so I don't, right there. We pass it in here. That's the only difference, Andrew. And as you can see, one is shorter than the other, right? So in this case, let's see, oh, I'm resetting it to be blank. That's silly. Save and run. And there's our kitty again. So I'll leave these both in here as an example, but again, newer browsers allow us to use these awesome short versions, and I prefer these ones when I'm writing my codes. Let's see. Hot linking like that for an actual website is still bad, right? Oh, you're saying like updating image source after the page is loaded is bad? Well, so Kai, this is probably a bad example, except to show you how it works. A realistic example would be, let's say you had a database full of like 1,000 different kitty images, and you were doing like, you had to loop through 1,000 kitty images. Well, you could loop through those 1,000 kitty images and make 1,000 new objects and then update their source. Like that's where this would be really viable. But here, it's kind of silly, just one example. And yeah, you wouldn't want to do this. You would want your source to have the real path in it. But if there's any dynamicy involved, anything regarding a database, anything that is just going to be updated, this is the way to go. Good question. Okay, so moving down, we can actually start styling. That's right. We can start styling after the fact, after the page is loaded. So that's why we, like even important still would overwrite some of these things. So that's why important is still so bad. But in here, we can actually just simply reference the element and then .style. And then there's some interesting JavaScript stuff in here. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let's go ahead and change this testing to a different color. So again, I'm referencing main header again. So it's nice and easy. Like I don't have to write out, because at this point, I would have had to write this query selector 3 times now. 2 times. Main header and main header again, because I'm now going to manipulate its style. So if I say style like this, what it's going to do, it's going to inject an inline style tag on the element. So if I look at testing right here and inspect this element right now, notice that it's just a basic HTML element. Well, the second that I inject style onto it, so I can say style color, assign the value of red, like that, and I run it. If I inspect this color now, or this testing, you can see I've got an inline style now right on there. And so we have to be careful when we're using JavaScript and CSS, because we know as we all should know now, on our specificity level, that inline styles are automatically more specific than anything else above them in the page, unless we have important on there. Because remember, they're more specific than even an ID. So we're entering another level of specificity, like one of the lowest levels, right? So we have to be really careful when we're using this. All right, interestingly enough, in CSS, if we wanted to change the background color of something, it looks like this, background dash color. But that's not going to fly in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, we have to write this, background color and a camel casing. So anytime that you've got a dash inside of your CSS, it's simply going to be camel cased. So if I come in here and run background color, save and run, you can now see the background color is correctly working. If I tried to use the original CSS like that, it looks like it's saying background minus color. So JavaScript needs that camel casing. So anytime you see a dash, it's going to be converted into a camel case. It's one of the gotchas of using JavaScript in CSS. But guys, we can do anything here. We can say display flex. We can do any CSS property inside of our JavaScript as long as we follow those rules. So why would you ever want to do JavaScript in CSS? Well, when you start getting into React and start using components to style things, or you want everything housed in one spot and modular, that's when JavaScript and CSS can really shine. But right now, in its current state of like what I'm doing, this would be stupid. I should just use CSS. But this is the beginnings of what you're going to be doing in the future with JavaScript styling later. But for now, it's kind of a fun example to go over and say, here's how it works. Okay, so we've gone over quite a bit. Any questions I can answer at this juncture regarding source attributes, text content, or styling? Okay, see, James says, would query selector kitty source work with get element by class name? Oh, you're just wondering if you were going, if you were chaining it? Yeah, it should be able to work if it's just one element. If it's get element by class name, it's going to try to grab all the first class name in that collection, though. So yeah, you should be able to chain right on there without putting it in variable if it's just one item. If it's multiple items, you're going to have to use that for each or convert it into an array. David says, I would assume that the better way to change styles for an element with JS would be to add and remove classes so that you don't mess with your specificity. Yes, that is the better way to do it. But again, when I'm talking about components in the future, you just got to trust me that there is a way that JavaScript can be really useful in CSS. Even though I used to be the biggest voice against it, I've since warmed up to if you're using it in a component library. Let's see, David says, so now when you're debugging code, sounds like you start looking at HTML, then JavaScript, then CSS. Well, not necessarily, because, well, you could, because HTML does have all the CSS class names for sure. So you start here, you look at the class name, and then of course you map it to your JavaScript. So I could see why you would skip over CSS. But it could be a fatal flaw if you don't look at your CSS, because what if nav item was displayed none, right? So you've got to look at all three at all times to debug. Because CSS is super powerful still. Let's see. Yasira says, how do you get a line break HTML, like the break tag in JS when you try to use text content? You can't. You just can't do that. So you'd have to use a different thing I'm going to show you later, Yasira, but that's actually the beauty of text content. Text content should not render HTML because of the security issues I was telling you about. Let's see. Kai says, and yet you're probably thinking that sucks, right, Yasira? Like that sucks, but it does suck. It's meant to suck so that you don't have to have security issues later. But inner HTML would do that, for example. So yeah, it's not going to work. Text content turns everything into a string. No interpolation allowed. Kai says, wait, how did you change the text color? So remember, I just went down here and said dot color. So style is an inline style right there. And so this came from my JavaScript. I manipulated that DOM after the fact. It's pretty cool. Let's see. Yeah, I don't have any errors. Okay. Okay. Would JS add more load time when converting versus just using HTML? Yeah. So James is saying, basically, why would you ever do this? And my answer again, James, is you would only use JavaScript like this if you didn't know what was going to happen later on, or if you wanted to be super modular with your CSS. But basically, these are the fundamentals, right? The first 5 weeks, I teach all the fundamentals, and then you're going to see these things later on in your career and go, oh, wow, okay, that's awesome. But for now, fundamentally, you just need to know that this is how we can change things. Yes, very powerful inline style. Yes, good. Okay, good stuff. Let's see. Before we get into class, let's talk about class name and ID. So class name is exactly what you think. It accesses or assigns a string containing all of the classes on the element. So notice it says all of the classes. So this one's worth looking at closer. Notice that it's only viable on an element. So when you see element in front of it, what is an element, guys? What is it? In DOM, what is an element? That's right, it's a node, but there are different types of nodes. So the correct answer I'm looking for is it's a type of node, right? Because everything is a node. But an element is a specific type of node. And that means like text nodes, for example, wouldn't have these abilities that I'm about to show you. So like a text node could never have a class on it, for example. Like right here. See how it says home and about and blog? Those are considered text nodes, meaning I would never want to put I couldn't put a class on there, right? Like this would not be viable, right? That doesn't work. So in this case, that's a text node versus an element node does have those abilities, and therefore we can do those things. Okay, just want to point that out really quick. So with class name, it only works on elements. So if you try to do this on things that are not elements, you're going to get an error. All right, so it gets and sets the value of the class attribute of the specified element. Pretty straightforward. So syntactically, var cname, element node reference, class name, and then you can say the class name is assigned the value of a cname, and then it'll update it. And so we can actually change the class name. So if we come in here, and let's say we have main header ABCD, right? So if we go over to main header, let's just do class name. Let's just console log this and see what happens. Save it and go to the console and run it. So in this case, it's getting all of the class names, right? Well, it says it gets and sets. So when we're talking about getters and setters, we're talking about getting values and like reporting them back, and then setting values, changing values. So in this case, class name is getting it here, but it said that we could set them here, right? So usually we use an assignment operator. Let's see if this works. So notice what happened. We actually completely knocked out all of the class names. So A, B, C, and D are all separate class names. So this is really awful, actually, in some ways, because we just wrecked everything. So we wrecked main header and A, B, C, and D. So if we go up to our main header and we inspect element, look what happened. Like it overwrote the class name. So you would lose all styles and all hooks. Like if you had your JavaScript hooks, they would all disintegrate at this moment. So you have to be very careful when we're using that in vanilla JavaScript. Okay. So there is a way that we can pick and choose classes, and I'll show you that shortly. But this does present a nice problem that we need to solve. So if we come back here, we can also do the same thing with IDs, by the way. It's the same thing. So won't waste our time. It's the same thing. So class list will return an array-like object. Actually, you know what? This is a great time to take a little break because we're almost done here. We're so close. We're right on schedule. We're doing great today. So let's take a 5-minute break. I know your brains are probably mushing a little bit. 5-minute timer, ready, break. All right. Let's finish strong here. Start talking about class lists and how powerful they are. They're actually called DOM token lists. So let's break it down a little bit here. So a class list will return an array-like object. So we keep seeing these weird array-like objects. Why is that? We've seen HTML collections. We've seen node lists. And now we're seeing a class list. What was that explanation I gave you as to why this weird behavior exists? Yes, Addison, very well said. Cross-language compatibility, because the DOM was written for multiple languages. So that is one of the nuances of the DOM. So because we have an array-like object of all the classes on an element, there are a number of useful methods. So this is really interesting. A class list is actually considered, so a class list is the name of it, but the type of it is a DOM token list. Okay? So let's go look at a DOM token list. Now, I realize at this point, at this juncture in the lesson, you're probably like, oh my gosh, look how many tabs we've had to open today to describe these things. How am I supposed to memorize all this stuff? Well, remember, like, I'm showing you like a lot of different things, and then I'm trying to give you advice on what the things that you should actually care about. DOM token list is one of those things we should care about, okay? So this is something that we need to learn how to use, because this is how we can toggle classes off and on. So that starts to get into some really cool behavior that we will then use with event listeners tomorrow. So this is kind of preparatory for tomorrow. So in this case, a DOM token list length will tell us how many DOM tokens are in there. And remember, so what it does is it represents a set of space-separated tokens such as a set is returned by class list. Okay, so let's go see what the heck that means. So class name we learned over gets and sets, all class names. So whenever we're using something that all, we have to be careful, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just comment this out. And we'll use main header again, just to see what's going on here with our class list and not class name. So list, let's see what happens here. So main header has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 class names. So remember, one of the things we could look at was length. So let's see if this works. Save, clear, and run. There it is, 5. So that's pretty cool. It's not overriding anything, it's just reading it. All right, well, let's see what happens if we just log the dang thing. Notice that it gave us a DOM token list. And inside of this DOM token list, it's a shallow list. Now, the cool thing is, for some reason, this one is able to be read inside of CodePen. I thought it would, because you can see how much is really going on inside of here. But in this case, 0 position, 1, 2, 3. These are the positions in the array of the array-like object, right? But we also have these really interesting methods that we can do stuff with. So over here, just to show you, here's all the methods that we can use. So we can add a class, we can remove a class, we can toggle a class. So toggle is going to be the one I want to look at. So toggle method of the DOM token list removes a given token from the list and returns false. If the token doesn't exist, it adds the function remains true. So basically, it gives us a free if-else statement. Do you remember an array method that does this as well? Do you remember? There's an array method that basically has an if-else nested inside of it. Good job, Chaya. Filter, that's exactly right. So filter takes our array method, goes through. Map, remember, converts it. Typo. I like it, Kai. So in this case, we have a token. within this token, it's a representative of each individual item. So we should be able to come in here and toggle based on a class. So we can actually come in here and say, toggle this class off and on. It's that simple. It's pretty cool. So in this case, we got our class list reference, and then we can just say toggle and then toggle a class off and on. All right, let's see if this works. So let's come in here and say toggle, and we'll just say testing. So as it currently stands, I'm not toggling on a certain class itself. This is the whole class list. So how could I select one item out of that class list? Or do I even want to select one item? Let's try this out and hit run. So in this case, we're just going to be coming in here and it's going to say true. Well, what if I run it again? True. Okay, interesting. So what's going on here is we're actually going to be toggling, we're console logging here, right? So in order to actually see this thing work, it needs to not be in a log. So we have to say main header class list. So that's all this stuff right here. Toggle on a class of testing. Okay, let's see if this works. Run. So it says true. Let's go see if it worked. Look at our testing. So main header, A, B, C, D, there's no testing going on here, right? So let's go look back at this and see what we did. So in this case, we're saying var result classes, toggle. So they have the classes here, toggle, OKC. Does anybody see anything? Why are we not getting this to work? Why is toggle not working? I see Andrew typing. So in this case, well, we don't need a trigger here because we can just instantly trigger it on our run button, like when we run the page. Eventually, of course, we want to have this run with a trigger. So first off, let's see if we can do something that'll change this before, you know, I don't have to go on the console to see this. So orange, right? So if it's working, then orange should overwrite whatever is going to happen. So let's try this to make that red go to, well, let's say green, because orange can look too similar. Okay, so if this is working on our class list, then we should be able to toggle on and off the class testing. Okay, so right now you're saying testing is on a paragraph. So in this case, what we need to do is we're just saying main heading. So main header right here, whoops. Right there, it's just main header class. So there's no tricks here. It's just grabbing this main header, right? So it's our H1. We're then saying, okay, grab the class list, which we already did before. Remember how I showed you the DOM token list? And now we're going to be toggling on, off and on a class. So in this case, let me get rid of all this stuff. And so we'll run testing. So in this case, everything's actually fine. We just have to make sure that when we're toggling a class off and on, that we have to be on the main, well, not the main header, but on the element that we're selecting. The class list is all 5, and then we're toggling this off and on. Interesting. So if we already had a testing class on here, so let's save it. If I run it, if we come in here, you can see that it takes off the testing class. So the toggle is always looking to see if something's true or false, and if it's true or false, it does something. That's right, Yasira. So in this case, what we're doing is if there's no testing, like in the source code, then we're going to toggle testing on, run, green. If testing already existed, it's going to reference and say, does testing already exist? If it does, take it off. Pretty cool, right? Now, writing this in one way, pretty stupid. But tomorrow we're going to add event listeners with clicks and all this cool stuff, and it's going to be really cool. So just hold on to this thought. But for now, we can do stuff that's a little more sensical, like adding and removing. So for example, if toggle looks like this, we should then be able to add, just always add this class no matter what. So if we hit run, we can see that testing's on there forever. If we inspect element, we can also see A, B, C, D, and then testing is added as the last class in the token list. Similarly, we can remove classes. So I could say remove, and then let's say I wanted to remove the A class. So I come in here and say A, save and run. Inspect my element here. And no longer is A there. We have B, C, D in testing. So if you're ever wondering what you can do with different classes, go look at the DOM token list for class list, and you'll see all these really cool things we can do. Okay? So that's like class list 101. You just got to be able to understand syntactically, you have to reference the class list, and then you can use the methods of class list. Okay, that's it. Pretty cool, pretty powerful. All right, we're almost done. We've now got to be able to create children. That's right. We're going to be able to create HTML elements in JavaScript and then put them on the page. So the way I think about DOM creation is like in 4 steps. These aren't like tried and true, but for me, they make a lot of sense, sorry. So DOM creation, or element creation. And notice I said element here. So remember, an element is a certain type of node. It's type 1, right? And so we're going to be using like a robust node here, like an HTML or a div tag or something. So the first things first is when you create a DOM element, first off, you actually have to create the element. That seems like pretty obvious when I say create. So I'm going to say const new element like this. Then I'm going to assign the value of document, because I've got to make sure it's on my DOM, on my tree-like structure. And then I'm going to use a new method you've not seen yet called create element. Inside of create element, I can write any valid HTML element in here. I'm going to do an A tag just to test this out. So if we go look at create element really quickly. In an HTML document, the document method creates the HTML element specified by tag name, okay? Tag name is really important to understand. So we can't put like a whole giant element. And this is because, again, the DOM is limited. Like, wouldn't it be nice to just do this? But we can't do that. It only accepts one valid element. And that's because, again, limitations of multiple languages. So in this case, our new element is this first thing we have to do. Well, second, we got to be able to slap it somewhere inside of our code, right? So you want to create a reference where you want your element to go. So in this case, we could put our element inside of our main nav. Let's say we're going to add another A tag. So I've got to get my query selector set up. So const main nav, assign the value of document.query selector, because I only want one. And in this case, because it's query selector, I've got to put the dot in there of main-nav. So create a place for the element to land, because we've got to be able to put this element somewhere, right? Step 3, let's add some value to the element. And honestly, we could swap steps 2 and 3. Like, we could, you know what, let's do that right now. Because we want to make our element smart before we put it anywhere, right? So in this case, add values, sort, or attributes, anything the element would need to survive in the HTML document to be normal. So in this case, we have two attributes. Well, we have a class and we have an href, right? So what we could do is we could say, okay, my new element, I want your href to be updated to something. So I can say href, right? Hypertext reference. And then I could assign it to something I want. So in this case, we could just do anything we want, even a hash symbol works. But at least now we're setting up that value to at least exist. Then we can say new element. Now, if we wanted to have the text updated, what's the way we can do that? How can we update text? Do you remember? That's right, text content. We can assign the value of, let's say, testing, just so we can see if it shows up. So you see what I'm doing? We've got basically an A tag. So in its current state, it looks like this. Like that's what it looks like right now after step 1. So kind of interesting, right? After step 2, it looks like this. A tag, now we've got an href, assign the value of a hash symbol, and we've got some text content of testing. Do you see how that works? It's kind of tricky. So first off, we've got to set up the element that even exists. Now we've got reference to the element. We're then setting its attribute, and we're setting its string value to A. Now we want to create a place for the element to land, which is in our name. We want it to be like in our A tags over here with all of its other A tag siblings. And then we can either prepend or append the item. So append or prepend the newly created element. And so what we can do is we can reference our main nav, right? Because our main nav's right here. Well, let's say we wanted testing to be at the front. So we could say prepend, and then we're going to pass in our new element that we created. Okay, let's see if all this craziness worked. Save and run. And there it is, testing. And of course, if we wanted it to be at the end, we could say append, run, and there it is at the end. So now we're creating HTML elements in JavaScript, manipulating them and putting them in the DOM, and none of this existed in the HTML. Isn't that crazy? We're creating elements from JavaScript now. And so you're going to see this pattern more and more as you start working in React and other JavaScript libraries. But this is how you could really make some really like data-driven, like state-driven is what we call it, applications. Because you're only concerned about what data you're getting and not what actually lives on the page already. This is really cool stuff, you guys. I hope you're like, whoa, because now we can take databases of information and make 1,000 versions of something based on our DOM manipulation. Okay, Lydia says, what if we want it in middle? What are you talking about? Oh, right in the middle of the elements. So then, Lydia, we would have to go in and find out, what's our middle element here? So it's probably about. And then we'd have to make a new selector for about. So we'd have to do like about. And then we'd have to change this to be about. And then we could do that. So that is annoying, right? You're probably going, oh, that's not as cool. But append and prepend is the way we get it into the node list. And then we can, of course, use, yeah, Sean suggests flexbox order. We could specifically snipe it like we did here. Lots of different ways to do it. That's it. That is like DOM 101 right there as far as selections go, methods and properties. Now, there's ways to traverse the DOM. You can go up and down in the DOM. So just like we have this tree-like structure, well, there's parent nodes and child nodes that we briefly talked about. But like the parent node of all the A tags is the nav tag. Well, the parent node of the nav tag is the header tag. And so you can actually go up and down inside the DOM, but we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Okay. So Kai says, but to do all of this, you need a nice HTML and CSS structure, right? You still need to put it in the time to make the scaffolding usable, right? I would say, yes, of course. You've got to be able to have some HTML structure somewhere for this to land. But even then, you know, we could reason about this and laboriously make this navigation with just create element over and over. But you will see in React how we can jump over this by using JSX. So I'm really excited to show you the dumb way first so that you can see the super smart way later. But this, my friends, is the beginnings of React's manipulation of the DOM. So one step at a time, one step at a time. I love that you're thinking that way, though. So let's go look at the project. So today, I'm going to have you build a pseudo content management system, meaning pseudo meaning fake, right? So in this case, like WordPress, Wix, Squarespace, these are massive content management systems that allow users that are non-technical to upload their data into an interface, which then procures the data, and then they run through it and they render a new DOM instance of it. Well, this is literally that. It's just much more technical. So what I'm going to have you do is you're going to jump into your index.html. You'll see the good old-fashioned great idea web page in here. All I've done is just provided you some markup. So in this lesson alone, this is the only lesson, by the way, that I don't want you to do this. In just this lesson, you're not to touch the HTML. Okay? So because like if you were using Wix or Squarespace or WordPress, you're not supposed to touch the HTML in this case, just like that. We're going to pretend like we don't even have access to it. Now, what I mean by touch is like you can't touch the source code, the HTML code, but you can use JavaScript all you want. So what I'm going to have you do is you're going to jump into your JavaScript file, and you're going to see a big old nasty object. And in this object, it's not even that nasty, but it's big. In this object, you will notice that I've got all the content that should have been existent in the HTML. So this is the content management system side, where this is the back-end database of what the user inputted. Then you've got to match these up to the right divs. So you're going to be using your DOM selection. And so I've given you an example here. I've said, okay, let logo, and you can say const here. Doesn't matter, but in this case, document get element by ID. I'm just showing you how you could use get. You could use query selector or whatever. But in this case, I'm just showing you get element by ID, logo image. Well, logo image is found here. So if we go to right there, there's our ID logo image. Notice the source attribute is empty. So I need you to fill that up. Well, I've given you an example where I'm using source attribute to do so, but we've already learned about an easier way to do that if we didn't want to do it this way. But notice how I'm traversing the object. I'm using bracket notation just because I want to, but in this case, site content is my object, right? And then image source is housed inside of my nav right there. So notice that I'm saying site content and the nav position, and then inside of nav position, I've got image source. So you're going to be traversing the database. This is a fake database, if you will, which will then populate our front end line by line. So your whole assignment this afternoon is to make sure the Great Idea web page looks like it should. And so based off the design file, you should be able to, by the end of, if you've done all the correct JavaScripting, everything will look like this when it's done. So that's your pseudo CMS experience today. If this is something that you're feeling really comfortable with, I've got an awesome stretch project for you called Digital Timer. And so if you click here, you'll notice it's a project. It's not just a simple like, now do this. No, it's a brand new project that it's a little bit more advanced and uses set interval and some other stuff that you haven't learned yet because it's stretch. So if you're really interested in this stuff, go further into Digital Timer, and basically you're going to be building a digital stopwatch. It's pretty cool. So part one, content management system. If you get through it, jump into the stretch project. Notice that there are stretch goals and a stretch project. There's a lot of stretch today and tomorrow. Okay. Any question I can answer before I set you loose? Kai says, well, he's asking a bigger question. Why do small businesses need people like developers if Squarespace and stuff exist? Well, have you tried to use Squarespace before, Kai? Do that, and then you'll know your answer. We're just not there yet. It is easier than coding, of course, but we're just not there yet. So if you as a developer know the secrets of HTML and CSS and JavaScript, you can be that much more deadly inside of a Wix, Squarespace, or WordPress environment. So it's funny, I actually make a lot of my money, or have made a lot of my money in the past, helping people set up their Squarespace, Wix, and WordPress sites. WordPress is totally different than the other two, though. WordPress is a whole massive ecosystem. I love WordPress. It's made me a lot of money. Everybody, all the other developers that go, oh, WordPress, poo-poo. I'm like, sweet, give me all that money. All these dumb developers don't understand how powerful it is. Let's see. Okay, Andrew says, I'm not understanding this instruction on the assignment. Task 3, update the HTML with the JSON data. So right here, this is saying what I just kind of explained before, where I need you to update the HTML because it's all like empty, doesn't have any values in it, with the JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, which is just this big block of data right here. So you've got to match them up using your document object model now to inject all the stuff. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Those are all the red question marks I saw. David says we're using JavaScript to inject into HTML. That's right. That's exactly right. Second question, do not touch the HTML. That's right. Read the instructions. Don't just go off my simple explanation. There's a lot of stuff I took time to write this down. And there's one of them right there. No direct updating of the HTML source is allowed. That only applies here, though. In projects tomorrow, like, you can manipulate the HTML. I just want you to experience the JavaScript only today. Line 10, what are you talking about? Index HTML, line 10. I don't know. I don't get it, James. Sorry. Note in the index HTML line 10, Google API needs to be changed to let's see. Is this not working or something? Ah. Guess I'm confused by that, James. Sorry. Oh, there's a Google font character issue. Oh, thanks. Yeah. That's user error. It's my error. So I'll fix that. I won't fix it now, though, because it's going to jack up your repo. So just don't worry about it. It's just the font. I'm not losing sleep. I'm looking at the JavaScript. Thanks for that update, James. Good eye. Okay. Head off to lunch. Have fun with the DOM. I think the DOM is so fun because like you finally get to change things. You finally get more control to actually start feeling like a programmer instead of just console logging everything. It's like now you're actually changing stuff. So get excited, like it's cool. And then tomorrow we're going to be talking about adding event listeners, event propagation. What the heck is an event? All that stuff is tomorrow, which will lead us into components on Wednesday and Thursday. It's going to be an awesome week. Okay, guys, have a good afternoon.